The Kadesh Conspiracy, Ramesses II, and the Art of the Sacred Lie, the prelude to war. The year is 1274, before the Common Era. The sun beats down on the Levant with a ferocity that matches the ambitions of the two most powerful men on earth. To the south, the young and charismatic Ramesses II, the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, leads a war machine that has been perfected over centuries. To the north, Muwatallitu, the silent and calculating king of the Hittites, commands an empire of iron and fire. For decades, these two superpowers have circled each other like hungry predators, fighting for control of Syria and the vital trade routes that connect the Mediterranean to Mesopotamia. But the city of Kadesh, a fortress sitting on the Orontes River, is the spark that will ignite the largest chariot battle in human history. History tells us that Ramesses won a glorious victory, but history was written by the survivors' PR department. Today, we peel back the stone layers of the great temples to reveal the truth. Kadesh was a catastrophic failure of intelligence and the birth of the most successful propaganda campaign in ancient history. The ego of a god, Ramesses II, was a man obsessed with his own divinity. He did not just want to rule Egypt. He wanted to be Egypt. To secure his legacy, he needed a military triumph that would rival the conquests of Thutmose III. He marched out of the Nile Delta with 20,000 men, divided into 4 divisions named after the gods: Amen, Re, Ptah, and Set. This was a massive logistical undertaking, a serpent of soldiers and supply wagons stretching 4 miles across the desert. But Ramesses committed the first and most fatal error of warfare. He believed his own myth. He was so convinced of his divine invincibility that he pushed his Amen division far ahead of the others, leaving his army dangerously fragmented. He was a king in a hurry, marching blindly into a trap that had been set months in advance. The Hittite deception while Ramesses marched with fanfare. The Hittite king Muwatallitu was practicing the dark art of psychological warfare. Aste Egyptian Amon division approached Kadesh. 2 Shasu nomads were captured by Egyptian scouts. Under questioning, these men claimed to be deserters from the Hittite army. They swore to the pharaoh that Muwatalli was hundreds of miles to the north, too terrified to face the Egyptian sun. This was a lie. The ambush at the Orontes. The disaster unfolded with terrifying speed. As the Egyptian Re division was marching in a loose column to join the pharaoh at the camp, the Hittite chariot, the Iron Fist, of the north burst from behind the city walls. They didn't just attack, they evaporated the Egyptian line. The Hittite chariot was a 3-man platform, heavier and more stable than the 2-man Egyptian versions. They crashed into the Re division like a tidal wave of wood and bronze. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers were slaughtered before they could even draw their swords. The survivors fled toward the pharaoh's camp, bringing the chaos with them. Ramesses II, sitting in his tent, suddenly found himself surrounded by his own retreating troops and thousands of Hittite warriors. The God King was cornered, the stand at the camp. What happened next is the core of the Egyptian legend. According to the poem of Pentor, Ramesses found himself alone, his generals having fled and his soldiers having vanished. The texts say he called out to the god Amen. "What is my father Amen doing? Has a father ever forgotten his son?" Then, in a frenzy of divine rage, the pharaoh supposedly mounted his chariot and single-handedly charged the 2,500 Hittite chariots, driving them into the river. While the imagery is magnificent, the reality was a desperate, bloody melee. Ramesses fought for his life alongside his elite bodyguard. The Hittites, however, made a fatal mistake. They stopped to loot the Egyptian camp. This greed gave the Egyptians a few precious minutes to regroup. Just as the pharaoh was about to be overwhelmed, a reserve force of elite Egyptian troops arrived by sea and struck the Hittites from the rear. This was not a miracle. It was a narrow escape facilitated by the Hittites' own lack of discipline. The stalemate and the retreat by sunset. The battlefield was a graveyard of broken wood and mangled horses. Muwatalli still held the city of Kadesh. His infantry, thousands of fresh troops, remained inside the walls, untouched. Ramesses had lost nearly half of his fighting force. Tactical experts today agree. Kadesh was a stalemate at best, and a strategic defeat for Egypt at worst. Ramesses could not take the city. He could not claim the territory. The next morning, a truce was called. Ramesses realizing he could not win a war of attrition so far from home, began the long, humiliating march back to the Nile. He returned not with the keys to Kadesh, but with a broken army and a bruised ego. The manufactured victory, it is here that the true genius of Ramesses II emerges, not on the battlefield, but in the scriptorium. Upon his return, he commissioned the greatest propaganda campaign in the history of the ancient world. He ordered the story of Kadesh to be carved into the walls of the Ramesseum, Luxor, Karnak, and the mountain of Abu Simbel. In these reliefs, the retreat is erased. The tactical blunders are forgotten. Instead, we see a giant Ramesses, 10 times the size of his enemies, crushing the Hittites beneath his wheels. He turned a military draw into a divine triumph. He repeated the lie so often, and in such massive stone letters, that it became the truth for the next 3,000 years. The first peace treaty, the Dark Record of Kadesh, concludes 16 years later. After nearly 2 decades of inconclusive border skirmishes, the two empires realized that a total victory was impossible. They signed the Eternal Treaty, the first recorded peace treaty in history. In the Hittite version, found in their capital of Hattusa, the treaty is a pact between equals. But in the Egyptian version, Ramesses ensured the language made it look as though the Hittites had come crawling to him for mercy. The Treaty of Kadesh proves that the battles solved nothing. It was a war of egos that cost thousands of lives, leaving the borders exactly where they had started. Ramesses II died as one of the most famous men in history, not because he was the greatest general, but because he was the greatest liar. He understood that in the end, people don't remember what happened, they remember what is written in stone.